Now for something a little different, and from inside the White House, we have a special guest joining us now, the 46th President of the United States and presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden, calling in to Morning Joe right now. Good morning, sir.
Hey, Mika, I'm more than presumption. I'm going to be the Democratic nominee.
There you go.
Okay, well, Mr. President, that leads to the letter that we just received a few minutes ago. And I'm curious, there's a part of it where you talk about the fact that you got 14 million votes, 87% of the vote. It was an open process. You only had 3 people running against you. You have 3,900 delegates. And then you ask this question, do we now just say the process didn't matter, that the voters didn't have a say? I'm curious, is that an allusion also to Donald Trump and the fact that Democrats, you believe, may now be doing the same thing that Donald Trump tried to do in 2020, and that is overthrow the popular will of Democratic voters?
Well, look, Joe, let me say it this way. The reason I've been out on the road so much all over the country, and while Trump is riding around in his golf cart, filling out his golf cart before he even hits the ball. But anyway, he hadn't been anywhere in 10 days. I've been all over the country, number one. And I've gone over the country for several reasons. One, to make sure my instinct was right about the party still wanting me to be the nominee. And all the data shows that the average Democrat out there who voted, the 14 million of them that voted for me, still want me to be the nominee, number one. Number two, the idea that Donald Trump has gained in any substantial way, has his argument to why he should be president is anywhere convincing than it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. It's just not there. And we're just starting to focus on Trump. And look, I attended services, spoke to over 600 people at Mount Airy Church of God in Christ in Philly. I stopped by campaign field offices with John Fetterman and Madeline Dean, both strongly supporting me. The President and the First Lady, we spoke at a campaign ice cream social for AFSCME, Council 13 in Harrisburg. 40 minutes after we spoke with supporters. Stopped by Denim Coffee. I mean, I was with the governor of Pennsylvania, who's still strongly supporting me. I mean, so look, and the fact is that this week I'm going to be hosting NATO Summit here in D.C., going to hold a press conference on Thursday. On Wednesday, I met with the National Union leaders of the AFL-CIO. On Friday, I traveled to Detroit, Michigan for a campaign event. Just on down the line. And so I'm not getting any of what I was told. I wanted to make sure I was right, that the average voter out there still wanted Joe Biden. And I'm confident they do. And I'm confident, and like I said, the press is with me. I think they've been fairly fair. I haven't read any reporting they did today. But the fact is that, I think they have to acknowledge we had large crowds, enthusiastic crowds. And, and now they're talking about whether I use a prompter. Well, I did it all extemporaneously. The fact of the matter is, I was using prompters too. I don't get that. But at any rate, the bottom line here is that we're not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere. I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024. We had a Democratic nominating process where the voters spoke clearly. I won 14 million of those votes, et cetera. So I not only believe that from the beginning, but I wanted to reassert it and demonstrate that it's true. And I'm going to be doing that all through this week and from here on.
So we noted yesterday there was quite a contrast. The people that were supporting you yesterday compared to, say, a lot of the Washington insiders and Hollywood moguls, and go down the list of very powerful people that want you out compared to the support that you had in Pennsylvania yesterday. That said, there are a lot of people of goodwill who love you, who believe you did a great job in your first term, who are still concerned. Yesterday, the topic came up of the Stephanopoulos interview, where you were asked the question, how would you feel if Donald Trump beat you? How would you feel after you lost? And you said, well, as long as I did the best I could do, that's the most important thing. That's caused Democrats concern who believe that losing is not an option. What would you say to those who are concerned by that answer?
It's not an option, and I've not lost. I haven't lost. I beat him last time. I'll beat him this time. And this is a guy who, look, we talk about debates. Look at his performance at debates. He lied over, Trump has 50 lies. I mean, look, this is a guy who says 10% of the universe. I want to get into it. He's just a liar. And he hasn't done a damn thing since the debate. He's been riding around in a golf cart for 10 days. He's down in Mar-a-Lago talking with his wealthy friend. I'm not running because of these guys, Joe. I'm running because, and you know me well enough to know this from the very beginning, I ran because I never bought on in the trickle-down economic theory. I never bought into the notion that we have to walk away from the rest of the world and cave to Putin or anybody else. I've never believed any of that. And I'm confident that's what the American people are. So what I did was I went out and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any slippage at all. And with the average voter, I don't care what the millionaires think. And by the way, 97% of all the people who contribute to us are people making under 200, contributing under $200. I think we have the largest contingent ever in history. I'm not positive of that, but I think that's true. And so I want their support, but that's not the reason I'm running. I'm not running about what they think and what they care about. And by the way, you don't see a whole hell of a lot of them flocking to Trump. You don't see a whole lot of CEOs flocking to Trump. You don't see any. You see the major economists out there talking about what I have been able to do. I don't hear anybody talking about his economic plan likely to bring America around and keep America first. And by the way, here's Trump talking about all that he's done and Trump and his debate night. He's a pathological liar. He lied about Roe. He refused to accept the outcome of the election. He refused to condemn January 6th. And he says, they claim, he spoke with Putin before he invaded. What the hell are we doing, Joe? What are we doing? This is bizarre.
No.
It's a good question. I have a few questions, Mr. President, and I know you know where I stand. And yet, I have a few questions. First, it's very simple. How can you assure the American people that you won't have another night like the one you did in Atlanta?
Look at my career. I've not had many of those nights. It was a terrible night, and I really regret it happened. But the fact of the matter is, how can you assure you're going to be on faith that can intervene on your way to go to, work tomorrow? Age wasn't, the idea I'm too old. Created over 15 million jobs, 21 million insured for the ACA, beat Big Pharma, relieved student debts for 5 million people, first black woman in the court. So I think I had a significant run, and that's how I'd measure me. Measure me what I've done. And by the way, in terms of my neurological capacity, I had a physical, a neurological physical as well in February. It's released. I released all my records, all of them. And I have a neurological test every single day. Try sitting behind this desk and making these decisions. You know it. Both of you know it. They know it. I'm not bad at what I do. And now, it doesn't mean I never make a mistake. I do. But I'm making those decisions.
Mr. President, if anybody in my family had a night like that, like if my Joe had a night like that, or my kids or anybody, I'd probably want to do some sort of workup and medical workup and make sure he's okay. Have you been tested for any age-related illnesses, pre-Parkinson's, or anything like that that might explain sort of having a night like that where you couldn't finish sentences?
Look, I was feeling so badly before the debate. When I came back, they tested me for, I thought maybe I had COVID, maybe there was something wrong, I had an infection or something. They tested me, they gave me those tests, I was clear. So, but look, I had a bad night. But the fact of the matter is, look at what I'm doing. I mean, let me put it this way. If there was something that was wrong that night, it's not like it comes and that's one night and it goes away. That's why I've been out. I've been testing myself, been testing everywhere I go, going out and making the case. The night of that debate, I went out. I was out till 2 o'clock in the morning that very night. That very night, it drives me nuts, people talking about this. That very night, I was talking to large crowds. Look at the crowds we've gathered everywhere from Atlanta to North Carolina to Pennsylvania, and look at the enthusiasm. But it was right after. Where the hell's Trump been? What has Trump said or done except deny and lie about what he's for?
Okay, so you have repeatedly said that all of these people and entities are wrong. And let me go through them. The New York Times editorial board, The Economist, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Boston Globe, Jerry Nadler, Seth Moulton. Let me go to Julian Castro, Tim Ryan, David Axelrod, David Remnick, Richard Haas. Yeah, I know which one you're responding to there. Zeke Emanuel. But they are saying that you should step aside. So what is your plan of attack moving forward? These are pretty big names.
Is to go out and keep doing their big names. But I don't care what those big names think. They were wrong in 2020. They're wrong in 2022 about the red wave. They're wrong in 2024. And come out with me. Watch people react. You make a judgment. You make a judgment. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm going to have all these foreign leaders here. I've been in contact with the new British Prime Minister. Anyway, look, the country, the rest of the world is looking. Our allies are looking for U.S. leadership. Who else do you think could step in here and do this? I expanded NATO. I solidified NATO. Ask your brother about it in Poland. I made sure that we're in a position where we have a coalition of people, of the nations around the world to deal with China, with Russia, with everything that's going on in the world. We're making real progress. The Biden plan, which got in Israel for the Gaza Strip, is something that was adopted by the UN Security Council. Whether it comes to fruition, it's awful close. We'll see. G7's okay. But look, I'm not going to explain any more about what I should or shouldn't do. I am running. Mm-hmm. And if you want to stop me,
I wanted to ask you, it's so interesting. You talked about how, you were supposed to lose in 2020. You won. There's supposed to be a huge wave in 2022. There wasn't. In 2023, Republicans were supposed to win. They didn't. You could say the same thing about France. Le Pen was supposed to win in 2 years ago. She ended up getting crushed. Her party, her far-right nationalist extreme party, was supposed to win yesterday. They ended up getting crushed. I'm curious, what message do you take from the French elections and the British elections? Because we keep hearing about the rise of far-right nationalist extremism in Europe. But I've got to say, it looks like this past week has been the worst week for far-right nationalists between Britain and France. I'm wondering what you say about that and what message you take to NATO allies this week.
Look, Joe, let's get something clear about 20 and 24. Not only were they wrong, I said they were wrong beforehand. I said we were going to win and how we were going to win. I didn't pretend about it. It wasn't like, oh, my God, I was surprised. I was not surprised. I predicted it. I knew what we were doing, number one. Number two, you may remember, I was one of the few people out there publicly saying before the 2022 election, there will be no red wave. There will be no red wave. Because I've been all over the country. I didn't believe it at all. And then in 2023, the key elections, I went into those races. Not every one of them, but a lot of them. And I said we were going to win. Look, we won those. So, Joe, it wasn't just that it didn't happen. I was predicting beforehand it would not happen. Because I've got a pretty good political instinct and eye. And here's the deal. It's not going to happen here this time around. The American public is not going to move away from me as an average voter. And again, I'm here for two reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hardworking middle-class people, give everybody a shot, just a straight shot. Everybody gets a fair chance, number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention. You know, on Europe, the polls are wrong in France. They're also right, there's no right wave or tide here in America either. By the way, in case you're wondering whether there is one, have you ever seen Trump run away so fast from what he's for? You know he's going to do it anyway, but have you ever, I mean, he's such a liar. This guy, everybody knows what they're planning to do. And now he's saying, no. This guy is going to rip away at a woman's right to choose in a permanent way. This guy is going to make sure that he exacts revenge. This guy's going to destroy democracy. This guy's going to give a blank check to the Supreme Court and going to use its past, the 2025 agenda. You know, this guy's extremely dangerous. But you notice he doesn't speak up for what he really is for. He's all of a sudden realizing, oh my God, nobody's for what I'm for. But anyway, look, and again, think of the things he lied about. He talked about he gave the largest tax cut in history. Yeah, he gave the largest tax cut in history to millionaires and billionaires. So he said that he's going to, those 10% universal tax proposal is not going to drive prices higher. Every major economist in the world is saying it's going to drive the average $2,500 per person. Only jobs we created for illegal immigrants and bounce back jobs and bounce back from COVID. Give me a break. That's what he said at the convention. At the debate. Everything he said. He said, you know, he largely fixed COVID. You kidding me? And what happened? Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything except me and the folks out there in the local, race. You know, he said, I did nothing to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In fact, he said, I think I encouraged Russia from going. I think he encouraged Russia going in. I'm reading from a list of lies. First of all, he was made up quotes, suckers and losers. I was with it. He called the Americans in the cemeteries from World War I suckers and losers. And so this guy's going to have to start to answer for what he did. I'm not letting up, Joe. I am not letting up a little bit. And by the way, France registered, look, you talk about Europe. France rejected extremism. Democrats will reject it here as well. Trump, and this is a guy who is an extreme candidate. I can't think of a candidate in my lifetime that's been more extreme. He makes George Wallace look like a patriot.
President Joe Biden, let's make this a thing. Thank you for calling in. We really appreciate it. And thank you for answering our questions.
If you're willing to hear from me, I'm willing to talk to you. Thank you very much.
We will take it on a regular basis.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Greatly appreciated.
President Joe Biden.
You know, I've been doing this a long time, and I, honest to God, have never been more optimistic about America's future if we stick together. I really mean it. Here's what else I've learned, and many of you have learned. You walk your faith as well. We're all imperfect beings. We don't know where or what fate will deliver us to or when. What we do know is that we can seek a life of light, hope, love, and truth no matter what. We can seek that life. Take all of our experiences and give everything we have to work together, because when we do, you can't stop us. I mean this sincerely.
President Biden speaking at a church in Philadelphia over the weekend as he faces a critical week for the future of his campaign. Calls for him to bow out of the race continue from some Democratic members of Congress, as well as members of the donor class. This comes as the president is set to lead the NATO summit this week in Washington. And Donald Trump is lying low for the most part. He's disappeared. with the.
Where is he?
Well, he's not around.
Why are they hiding him? Are they afraid that he may go out and talk about World War II coming or Barack Obama being president? Or will he go,
definitely convinced.
Like, why are they afraid? Like, why are they afraid to let him talk? Here they're going, and all of their allies going, oh, Joe Biden, what are they hiding? What are they? What are they scared of having him? And Donald Trump, he's burrowed down in Mar-a-Lago. They won't let him out. He's a prisoner in a gilded cage because they're afraid he may actually open his mouth.
And, of course,
the irony.
The chances of lying are high.
Well, you know what they found was, as badly as Joe Biden did, we've all said he did horrifically. You look at the polls, and even the New York Times Siena poll, which has always been an outlier against Biden, shows that even with that terrible performance, he picked up independent voters against Donald Trump, right? So what are they doing with Donald Trump? They're keeping him out of sight until the Republican convention. Maybe, who knows? Maybe his handlers, maybe his bosses will let him out this week. But right now, they're saying, no, man, you have to stay right there. You can't talk. People hate you. Like, independents hate you. Swing voters hate you. Like, just be quiet and you may win this thing again. It's kind of crazy, really.
Well, you know, this is, it's been a crazy week. And
after Joe Biden's debate, I said he needed to consider getting out, but I said also for a guy who's been in politics for 50 years, who's been in public service for over 50 years, we need to give him time. We need to give him some time. There it is. For a man who's given more than 50 years of his life to public service, it is more than fair to take a breath and see what happens over the next few days. Well, those few days have turned into about a week and a half. And here we are. And I find it absolutely fascinating. We're going to get to the Bloomberg polls that came out this past weekend. And I've already talked about the Siena poll that shows Donald Trump losing independents. I mean, after Joe Biden's debate performance. But Joe Biden now has what I would dream of having if I were running for president of the United States in his position. I've got Washington insiders against me. Well, let's just put it the way it is. Joe Biden now can say he's having to fight media elites, New York Times editorial page, billionaire donors. They've been on the phone for a week and a half. Washington politicians, even though Mark Warner has now canceled his meeting. And the Congressional Black Caucus, by the way, not really happy with all of these people trying to substitute their elitist viewpoints for that of millions of Democratic primary voters. Hollywood moguls, hey there, Ari, and Ms. Disney, and of course, MAGA extremists. So Biden allies now, this is what they're going to say. Oh, wait a second. So you're telling me that media elites and billionaire donors and Washington politicians and Washington moguls, they all think that they can substitute their judgment for the judgment of millions of Democratic primary voters? John Heilemann, it may happen. And this isn't about what ought to be. This is about what is. And, you know, Joe Biden has a fired up, angry Democratic base in parts, and he's got a lot of elites putting him in a position where he can look strong, staring them down. So where are we this Monday morning as we go into one of the more pivotal weeks in American politics?
Well, I think, Joe, that the idea that the way that you framed it, which is the way that the Biden campaign is trying to frame it also, which is that, you know, Joe Biden is being defiant in the face of out-of-touch elites across the spectrum who are trying to force him out of the race. And that's a good fight to have. I think that there is one, if we move away from the rhetorical framing of it and into the more substantive reality of it, is that one of those categories of elites are elected officials. And elected officials who represent a whole bunch of voters and who are paying attention to what voters are saying. We don't know yet what members of the House who've come back to Washington, what they all heard over the time they've been home on their recess, which is the entire period, essentially, from the debate all through last week. And I imagine that all these House members have a pretty good fingertip feel for what's going on at home, what they're hearing from their voters. And I think they're not. They are, to the extent that some of them would like Biden to step down. And as you know, yesterday, there were more calls on this call that Hakeem Jeffries did yesterday. There were 4 ranking members of Democratic committees on the House side who came out and said that Biden should, on that call, at least they wanted Biden to step aside. A couple more who said that they had pretty profound concerns about it. I think those people are, unlike in reality, I mean, unlike you can say about billionaire donors that they are billionaire donors, and they obviously would like to win, like to see their money that they're putting into behind Joe Biden. They like to see that be for a candidate that they can win. But I do think that Biden's biggest challenge right now is not even the donor class. It certainly isn't the media, which we can talk about all day about whether the media, what the media's role in all this is. But I do think that their biggest challenge is his party on Capitol Hill, which Joe Biden clearly cares about. He is essentially playing chicken with members of Congress, and they are in a staring match right now. A lot of people on the Hill would like Biden to step aside. They do not want to come out publicly and say that. Biden is essentially saying, if you want me out, you're going to have to come out and say it. And if I had to say what I thought the ultimate dynamic here is going to be is, does there come a day in the course of the next week where the following 4 people, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, Hakeem Jeffries, either alone or in together, either literally or figuratively, go to Joe Biden and say, you've lost the party, and we don't see a path forward. We think it'd be best if you stepped aside. If that conversation happens, I think it'd be hard for Joe Biden to go forward. If it doesn't happen, it's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I think it's very unlikely I just think it's unlikely that's going to happen. I think it's unlikely it's going to happen because you talk again to members of the Democratic base, you talk to members of the Congressional Black Caucus, you talk to a lot of core Democratic voters. You even look for anecdotal evidence. A lot of angry Democrats out there who are asking why these people are trying to substitute their judgment for Joe Biden's, or for the millions of voters who voted for Joe Biden. So, it could happen. It could happen, but I suspect that these House members, and I started to suspect this a couple of days ago, Mika, that these House members were probably hearing back in their home districts what I heard when I was vacationing with my kids.
Or what they were screaming in the church in Philadelphia.
Or what they were yelling in the church in Philadelphia. But when I was with my kids and the window was rolled down and had a couple different people go, "Hey, Joe, leave Biden alone."
Yeah, you did.
And that was like in the day or two after the debate. And it's anecdotal. Everything's anecdotal. But I've had enough calls from elites over the last couple of weeks who want him out, and enough calls from members of the sort of Democratic rank and file. They're not ready for him to get out. And they're wondering why the elites are splitting the party. And I think part of it is they don't have confidence that Kamala Harris is going to do any better than Joe Biden in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and in Pennsylvania.
We're going to hear more from Ryan Nobles in just a moment, his latest reporting on what's going on with this on Capitol Hill. Most polls still show a competitive race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, even after last month's debate. The latest survey from Bloomberg News and Morning Consult finds every battleground state within the margin of error. Aside from Pennsylvania, according to the poll, Trump narrowly leads among registered voters in Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, and is ahead by a larger margin in the Keystone State. Biden, meanwhile, holds small leads in Michigan and Wisconsin. Separate polling from CBS News and YouGov showed the race essentially tied among likely voters nationwide, the same as it was in May. Polling from the New York Times and Siena College shows Trump leading by a wider gap among both registered and likely voters
right after the
nationwide.
debate.
But that poll did show independents moving toward Biden.
So, Sam Stein, Mika will tell you, I do this show, and then I just, I just dig a hole and go into it and sleep for, for about 20 hours, then I come back and do the show. I do not, as you know, you've known me a long time, I do not work the phones. I just don't. I do not. I'm not like, hey, what's happening? What are you hearing on your? I just don't do that. I got 4 kids and I got 4 hours, and I read in for the most part.
And nobody knows nothing anyway.
And nobody knows nothing anyway. I had been on the phone nonstop for 2 weeks,
right.
And it is so interesting that after the debate, everybody was in meltdown mode, including the campaign, talking about how they had heard that I talked to the most powerful Democrats who all believed after the debate they were going to see Biden down by 10 points. They all believed the small dollar donors were going to dry up. They all believed it was a matter of days. It reminded me so much of when Sam Donaldson got on ABC News right after Monica, after that news came out, and said Bill Clinton wouldn't last the week because everybody in official Washington said Bill Clinton wouldn't last the week. It reminded me of Access Hollywood when everybody said, including Mike Lee, I would never support such a man or let anybody talk to my wife, or, the guy that's, at the front of the National Front carrying that flag. But we heard it was over then. I must say, on that phone all day yesterday, I was hearing just the opposite. I was hearing the opposite from campaign, from Democratic donors, and especially from members of the Congressional Black Caucus. They're like, what? The polls are the same. We're with Joe. Why are these people picking on him? I'm just reporting. Yeah. I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure you've heard the same thing. They were actually, the Biden campaign went from a week ago saying it's all over to yesterday going, oh my God, we feel energized, especially with Fetterman and Casey and everybody going around with him. He said it was one of his best days on the campaign trail in 2020 or 2024.
I'm glad to hear you're working the phones again. We need you out there. I, too, was also working the phones. And to your point, I talked to a member of Congress yesterday about what the reaction was in his home district. And he said it was about an 80-20 split. 80% of his correspondence with voters were Democrats saying Biden needs to stick it out. People are being too rude, too mean. They're trying to push him out. 20% of respondents were panicked about Biden's position, worried about the election. The split was even more interesting because of who he was talking to. Predominantly, African-American voters were the ones who wanted Biden to stick with it. And the more middle-upper-class white voters are the ones who tended to be more panicky. And I think that gets at the place we're in right now, where you see the base of the party, the bedrock constituencies, the CBC members saying Biden should stick around. They're offering the support to him. They're coming out vocally saying he needs to stay. You even saw Representative Clyburn, who obviously matters tremendously in this whole process, put out a supportive statement the other day, too. There are obviously major pockets of discontent and fear within the party. You saw about 9 members total now have said they want Biden to drop the race. Look, I don't think that's a great position necessarily for the party. It's fine for Biden. But when 20% of your party is skittish, that's not great. But it is survivable if Biden chooses and wants to survive it.
All right, joining us now, former chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio. She is a National Advisory Board member for the Biden-Harris campaign and is calling on her colleagues to continue to support the president. And I'm wondering if you're hearing back from your colleagues that whether or not they will support President Biden.
First of all, let me just say thank you. And yes, yesterday, as a matter of fact, I just returned from being in New Orleans at the Essence Festival and Conference, where many of us took to the stage before the vice president spoke. And we sent a clear message, joined with our chairman, Stephen Horsford, and Congresswoman Maxine Waters. We are 100% with the president. We are standing up with the Biden-Harris team because they have delivered vote for protecting our freedom and our democracy. We know this is the most consequential election in our lifetime, and we know what's at stake. And we're making sure that we crisscross the United States, making sure that we say to the American people, let's not judge our president on a 90-minute performance. You have to look at 3.5 years. You have to look at his lifetime of commitment and what's at stake and what the alternatives are. Someone who's about retribution, someone who is about revenge, someone who wants to be a dictator. So I think we have to continue to stand together. He has had overwhelming support by Black Americans, and so I stand with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Jonathan Martin is with us and has a question. Jonathan.
Hey, Congresswoman Jonathan Martin here. Just curious if you could speak to the generational dynamics within the CBC, and particularly the role that the more senior folks like Maxine Waters and Jim Clyburn play, and how much their perspective matters in shaping the public and private sentiments of the younger members of the caucus.
We have a very diverse congressional Black caucus, and certainly people like Maxine Waters and Jim Clyburn. They're historians. They provide great leadership, but also mentorship. They relate very well to our younger members. We have a young member of Congress from the great state of Ohio, my state. She has been very strong, very forceful, and she is supporting President Biden. Another younger member, Shontel Brown and Amelia Sykes, both Black women, active members of the CBC. Shontel also serves as an advisor. We have people like Jasmine Crockett, progressive, very much joined us in New Orleans, 100% supporting President Biden. So I think it's not just about the differences in our age, it's about what he is delivering. When you look at what Black Americans and Americans are asking for, they're concerned about health care. They're concerned about the economy and jobs and education. And President Biden has delivered on those things. I mean, think about it. What he's done, more than 15 million jobs. And Black Americans are in those jobs. When you think about capping insulin at $35 a month, do you know how many Black individuals are dealing with being diabetic? I know, I'm diabetic. Putting a $2,000 cap on medical costs for our seniors, these are the things that people should be looking at. And we've been here before. In 2020, there were polls, there were people who were saying that Biden couldn't win. When you look at the thing about age, he was the same age when he delivered the State of the Union address a few months ago, and members stood up in that chamber and applauded him for his delivery, for his work, and for his presentation. So let's not get it twisted. Let's not deal with just the last 90 minutes of a debate against someone who's a dictator, someone who lies repeatedly, and someone who didn't answer any of the questions either. And we didn't have media and other folks saying, let's challenge or question Trump on his ability to lead. But maybe that's because we know he won't and he can't lead.
Congresswoman Jim Van Hyde, Axios, the members of Congress who have called, your colleagues who have called for him to step aside, I think what they would say to that is, right, yeah, we agree that if you look backward, everything that you just said squares with their view. I think their concern is that wasn't just a blip, that they've sort of watched the president, especially over the last 3 months, and he does seem like getting older is starting to take a toll. And they wonder, often on behalf of their voters, can he really do this at 82, 83, 84, 85, 86? You feel 100% certain that you could look at your colleagues and look at voters and say, yes, he's sharp as ever, and I am highly, highly confident that he could do this gig 5 years henceforth?
So let me answer like this. First of all, he was asked, was it an episode or a condition? He said it was an episode. He was sick. He had a cold. He had a bad day. He admitted that. And that's the first step. Someone admits he had a bad day. He made a mistake. We all have. But the second thing, none of those individuals are medical doctors. So I support the president. I believe that it was an episode. I believe that he had a bad day. And I believe that he is ready and positioned to run to be president in this November election. Life is not promised to any of us. But what I am saying, let's get through this election. Let's support this president because he is our very best option to beat Donald Trump. He is the only one, unequivocally, who has a reputation of delivering. Someone who has delivered for the American people, black, white, and other. So, yes, I can look at my colleagues and say, I stand with Joe Biden going into the convention. As a delegate, I'm going to support him. I stand with Joe Biden as being our next president, with Kamala Harris standing right next to him as our vice president.
Former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio. Thank you very much for being on the show this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm proud to be partnering with my very good friend Lee Greenwood, who doesn't love his song, God Bless the USA, in connection with promoting the God Bless the USA Bible.
I'm thrilled to introduce you to something I'm incredibly proud of. My own brand of organic specialty coffee, Rudy Coffee.
Hi, this is Mike Huckabee. Isn't it amazing how so much that President Trump said still rings true? But schools and the media don't want our kids to hear anything positive. And that's why my team created the Kids Guide to President Trump.
I'm sorry I'm so upset, but please help President Trump. If you can afford $5 or $10, if you can't afford $1, fine, just pray. And if you got any money to give, give it. LindseyGraham.com.
It's as inspiring as Oral Roberts.
My Lord.
Up in the tower saying, God's going to kill me if you don't give me $3 million. I think Oral got the $3 million. Well, and there's Jimmy.
God.
There's what? Jimmy. We got the Jimmys. Listen, that is a reach back. That's
some parallel.
That is a good parallel right there. But I gotta say, I got a question. Here.
Well, for who?
Well, who do we have? Who do we have this hour, Alex?
I mean, it's the top of the seven. So
is it?
We've got Joe Conason.
So John Heilman, let me ask you, because I got, I don't have young kids, but so I'm just curious. So this Trump book that our good friend Mike Huckabee is getting out, the coloring book. So do we skip over the grab them by the that chapter? Do we skip over the chapter?
Did the kids color that in?
How do they color that in?
What
Is
do
there
they do with that?
Cut out of Billy Bush and Donald Trump, or
getting off a bus?
Like getting off, or maybe they do the bus instead of what's said inside the bus. I'm wondering, what about the part where he says, "Hey, we're going to shoot the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff"? Like, do they have Mark Milley up against the wall, and do you color the rifles? Like, what do the kids do for that? Or, well, I don't know. Well, when he talks about, E. Jean Carroll, and that situation where the judge says he raped her,
he would never date her.
Told E. Jean's.
Like, how does that? Is that a
said Meek was
picture book?
Bleeding badly from a face.
That was a tweet. I don't know if they'd put a tweet
that in.
What would they do?
I mean, there's so many
blood going down.
How about that? I'm gonna suspend the Constitution, or what? Did he terminate the Constitution? Which, of course, he lies about.
This is a big children's book.
This is a big. I just am curious. How do we walk our children through all those chapters? I'm a little confused.
Joe, I would take special pains if you eventually find yourself with young children again, which who knows? Anything could happen. You two are a magical couple. I would just say you want to avoid the chapter. There's a chapter in there about Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. You want to stay away from that chapter in particular.
Hold on.
With your kids.
So wait a second.
When they're dancing
are you saying then that Orgy Island chapter.
Yeah, just cross that off the list. Cross that off the list. Not appropriate for children.
So Reverend Huckabee's book, we're going to keep the Orgy Island part out.
What about I didn't sleep with the porn star?
Right. The porn star. Okay, we'll keep that porn star out. And
how do they draw
Reverend
that?
Huckabee. Well, what about the kid's book? There's so many things he said that Trump did that kids need to remember. We've already talked about the executions, summary executions.
What about the
politically disloyal? Okay, so we keep those parts out.
Yes, those parts out.
How about throwing paper towels?
Yes, there's a whole bunch of parts you want to leave out, and then I would just in general, even though they offer a version of that book that's a scratch and sniff, I would avoid that entirely. Just don't do that one.
Oh my God! You are.
Here we have that. Let's bring an author and political columnist, Joe Conason, whose book is titled "The Longest Con: How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism." And Joe, it's just like, I mean, come on, that medley right there, that montage.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
It's just like a softball right across the center of the plate for you. Tell us about the book.
Joe and Mika, great to see you again. I could not have asked for a better intro than that montage, although there's, I would say, an endless amount of footage of the same kinds of stuff.
Endless.
And while I was listening to you and John here, I looked in the index of the book and found former Governor Huckabee, and of course he's in here as a guy who went into the business with his mailing list from his presidential campaign to market a phony cancer cure that was supposedly a spiritual cure, a biblically based fake cancer cure. And that is the kind of thing that has become rampant on the right in the last several decades. And so the book sort of tells this story of how conservatives got to the point where they are milking their own constituents for every penny that they can squeeze out of them on false pretenses, in almost every case. I mean, and the epitome of this, of course, is the former president who booked $250 million after the 2020 election by telling people that he was going to set up an official election defense fund. And of course, the money didn't go to that, but they pulled in hundreds of millions of dollars in 2 months after the election. And it ended up in a super PAC that he controls and that he can spend on anything, including, of course, his legal defense, not election defense, his legal defense, his personal legal defense. But this is a syndrome, a problem on the right that lots of conservatives have discussed. You know, the foreword to the book is by my friend George Conway, who I think you guys know, who is an honest conservative, and like many honest conservatives, is appalled by the dishonesty, the grifting, the scamming that is just rampant in their movement now.
Joe, I want to say, first of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
It identifies grifters, swindlers, and frauds. It says the subtitle of the book's called The Longest Con, the subtitle of the book, How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. It is clear that they have, and you point to Trump, right, is the kind of apotheosis of the kind of platonic ideal of grifter, swindler, and fraud all rolled into one.
Boss grifter, yeah.
But here's the thing, how? This is what this book promises, is an explanation of not just a description of that this has happened, but how it's happened. And this more of a PhD dissertation than a cable TV question in the morning. But what's the brief summary for how? How did that happen?
It happened, John. It began, I would say, in its heaviest form with the Goldwater campaign, after the Goldwater campaign in 1964, when a man named Richard Viguerie figured out that suddenly Goldwater had amassed a critical list of donors to his campaign. Viguerie sent people to the Capitol, women, who wrote down the names of all the donors before the clerk of the House stopped them. And suddenly he had a big mailing list on magnetic tape. And what they could do was monetize those people with appeals to paranoia, prejudice, fear, the whole panoply, hatred, the whole panoply of appeals that the far right has used for many years. And what they could do with that list was get them to send money. Viguerie discovered, hey, we can get these people to send us money. That expanded, in many directions since then. But the basic appeal is the same. It's what Roger Stone said years ago, Trump's top advisor. You know him. He said, hate is the most powerful force in politics. And if you can find a way to appeal to people's basest motives, they will support you and, in this case, send you money. And the two elements kind of have fused in both the Republican Party and the conservative movement as a whole.
The new book is entitled The Longest Con: How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. It goes on sale tomorrow. New York Times bestselling author Joe Conason, thank you. And
we can report now that President Biden is sending a letter to Democrats on the Hill saying we have to stay together. We need to be united against Donald Trump. That letter's gone out, or is going out.
Right, the second.
Right now. The question, of course, Jackie, is how's the Hill going to respond? What's going to happen this week when Democrats come back? Are the defections going to be so large that the president's going to have to take notice?
Yeah, guys, I'm not going to make any predictions here, but if there is one thing that I'm absolutely sure of, it's that having lawmakers return from their districts and being in the wild and in the halls of Congress with reporters peppering them inevitably all day long, all week long, we are certainly going to know the answer to that by the end of the week. It's easier for these members who have been in their districts to kind of dodge this question. So far, we've only seen snippets of leaked conversations so far that have kind of illustrated two sides of this conversation that are happening right now with people like as Rev Al just noted, members of the CBC on a conference call yesterday rallying around Joe Biden versus people like Jerry Nadler, Mark Takano, Adam Smith, arguing that Biden simply can't prosecute the case and that Democrats need to get him off of the top of the ticket and need to make that case to him directly. But what I also know is that Democrats are sort of tired of letters and memos from the Biden campaign and from President Biden. They want to see him and speak with him directly. That's what Mark Warner wanted to do and was sort of trying to rally his colleagues at the end of last week to have a meeting with him and try to convey their concerns and doubts in person, hopefully maybe be assuaged in some way. They were not assuaged in any way on Friday from that interview that Biden did with ABC News. They got a memo from the Biden campaign over the weekend that was outlining the 15 various events that Biden had done since his debate performance. That was also unsatisfying to them. So Biden has a really tall order this week. Democratic members want to hear from him in person. They want to have a more open conversation than the one that they're having right now. And Biden also has NATO leaders in town, international leaders who have very similar concerns as we've been seeing, along with a number of stops to make on the campaign trail this week.
Yeah, we've got the letter from President Biden to fellow Democrats that just went out. Mika, I'll have you walk through it. I will say there is one, and by the way, I understand them being tired of letters. There's probably a letter they're going to want to read and try to work through, because if you want Joe Biden out of the race, there are some tough facts here that you're going to have to get past. And Mika, I'll let you walk through it. But I just want to say probably the strongest argument for him, he says in the fourth paragraph down. We had a Democratic nomination process, and the voters have spoken clearly and decisively. I received over 14 million votes, 87% of the votes cast across the entire nominating process. I have nearly 3,900 delegates, making me the presumptive nominee of our party by a wide margin. This was an open process for anyone who wanted to run. Only 3 people chose to challenge me. One fared so badly that he left the primaries to run as an independent. Another attacked me for being too old and was soundly defeated. The voters of the Democratic Party have voted. They have chosen me to be the nominee of the party. do we now just say, I'm slowing down for emphasis, simply because this is what Jerry Nadler and other Democrats are going to have to be able to answer effectively, and Mark Warner? Do we now just say this process didn't matter, that the voters don't have a say?
And that's a key question because his opponent is a man who tried to overturn the election.
Right.
And then a man who still to this day does not accept the election results. Right. Joe Biden goes on to say, I decline to do that. I feel a deep obligation to the faith and the trust the voters of the Democratic Party have placed in me to run this year. It was their decision to make, not the press, not the pundits, not the big donors, not any selected group of individuals, no matter how well-intentioned. The voters, and the voters alone, decide the nominee of the Democratic Party. How can we stand for democracy in our nation if we ignore it in our own party? I cannot do that. I will not do that. I'll jump to the end, but there's a lot here to go over. The president goes on to say, and this is his letter to fellow Democrats, the question of how to move forward has been well aired for over a week now, and it's time for it to end. We have one job, and that is to beat Donald Trump. We have 42 days to the Democratic Convention and 119 days to the general election. Any weakening of resolve or lack of clarity about the task ahead only helps Trump and hurts us. It's time to come together, move forward as a unified party, and defeat Donald Trump.
So
Biden took his campaign to battleground Pennsylvania yesterday. In the morning, he delivered remarks at a predominantly black church in Philadelphia where he touted his first-term accomplishments and remained adamant about staying in the 2024 race.
I've always felt the power of your faith in good times and in tough times. The fact is, as Scripture says, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Our purpose is to serve others. That's our purpose. To know everyone is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. To know faith without works is dead. We're all called to be doers of the world. In this nation, that means keeping our eyes on the North Star, the very idea of America, that we're all created equal in the image of God and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect our entire lives. We've never fully lived up to that, but we've never fully walked away from it either. And that's because of you and generations before you who led the church from slavery to freedom, always praying, always believing that joy cometh in the morning. You've never given up. In my life, and as your president, I've tried to walk my faith. Folks, I know with every fiber of my being, I know I'm going to look like I'm 40 years old, but I've been around a little bit. The bishop and I were talking about that. It's heck turning 40. Well, all kidding aside, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and I, honest to God, have never been more optimistic about America's future if we stick together. I really mean it. Here's what else I've learned, and many of you have learned. You walk your faith as well. We're all imperfect beings. We don't know where or what fate will deliver us to or when. What we do know is that we can seek a life of light, hope, love, and truth no matter what. We can seek that life. Take all of our experiences and give everything we have to work together. Because when we do, you can't stop us. I mean this sincerely. When I ran the first time for president, I said something basic. I said we have to bring back dignity and hope in America. Number one. Number two, we have to give working class and middle class people like the family I came from a shot and build the economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down. And thirdly, We must unite America again. That's my goal. That's what we're going to do. God bless you all, and may God direct our troops.
Oh, wow. Join the conversation, we have co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim VandeHei, senior political columnist for Politico, Jonathan Martin, and Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian, Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Jim VandeHei, we got a split screen here. Well, we got light up. We're almost Brady Bunch like here. But Jim VandeHei, I've been talking this morning about what the base is saying. Polls aren't quite as bad as a lot of Democrats thought they were going to be. And I have been absolutely bombarded by texts, we will just say, by people charitably that others might call the elites. And of course, we're not elites. As you know, I'm just a poor country lawyer that falls off a turnip truck every morning, does this show. So, but we'll just say these elites are my good friends. And they're going, wait, Biden's going to lose. Democracy's over. And I think what's so fascinating is you really do have a divide between elected leaders, between the rich and powerful, and then those like in the Congressional Black Caucus, people in that Philadelphia church where Biden had one of his better events in a long time, better days in a long time. There does seem to be a divide right now between sort of the establishment and the Democratic base that appears to want to keep Joe Biden in the race.
There's no doubt that there's a pretty big divide. I think there's a lot of House members, particularly those that are in swing states or in swing districts, who are deeply concerned, right? If there wasn't a real problem, if they weren't hearing from the base, if they weren't hearing from voters, you wouldn't have people huddling with Hakeem Jeffries yesterday and expressing the concern, including some calls, additional calls for the president to step aside if it weren't real. And that's kind of what we're locked at. You've got the president who, you talk to him, right? Like he's not backing down. He's not getting out. He's said that. He believes that against a lot of Democrats who are really at their breaking point. And there'll be a lot more conversations today. But I don't agree that it's just the elite media or it's just donors, because members of Congress are fundamentally about self-preservation. That self-preservation rests on the ability to get a majority of the vote. So when they're talking to their own voters, that's when they get this level of concern. And that's why when you see senior members of the House delegation, like you did on that call yesterday, express concern, you can safely assume it's much more widespread. That doesn't mean that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer go to the White House and beg the president to step aside. But it is possible, and there is still enough concern that pressure is on them. And I think sometime in the next week, you're going to have people like the Obamas, you're going to have people like Jeffries or Schumer, one way or the other, come out and say emphatically either people should put a sock in it or the president should think seriously about stepping aside.
All right. J. Mark, what say you? You've been out and have seen what's been going on. There does seem to be a massive divide in the Democratic Party. Either way you cut this, it's good for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I wrote a column this morning about this divide, and frankly, it's Biden's last line of defense, Joe. I think Biden's playbook now is to try to rerun 2019 and 2020, where he effectively framed the opposition to him as that coming from white liberals, while he had the grassroots base of blacks, Latinos, and labor. And I think that's what he's trying to do now. He has no other choice. This is his only path out. But it does increase, I think, the relevance of the CBC in this entire dynamic this week, because Biden is putting so much stock in this defense from black lawmakers and black folks in the grassroots that if any of them do turn, it's going to be all the more decisive against Biden. But, Joe, I couldn't help but notice on that call yesterday that Jim mentioned, all the ranking members who called for Biden to step aside, with one exception, were white. What I want to know is, will there be any defections in the Black Caucus? And what's happening, I can tell you there, that folks like Maxine Waters and Jim Clyburn, the elders in the Black Caucus, are emphatically for Biden, which sends a message to the younger members of the Black Caucus to stick on board. Can Biden retain that support this week? And if he can, it's going to be crucial.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more, September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.